Hello and welcome to the Backlot 605 box office bonus episode where we like to talk about different top 10 lists of movies and whatnot that usually have something to do with what we've got going on that week. I am your host, Brian Mensing, and joining me as always is Derrick Veurink. How are you doing again tonight, Derrick?
Doing great. You?
Good. Yeah, I guess I can't complain. I can't complain. All right. So we this week here, what did we kind of come up with that we are going to be talking about this week, Derek?
Yeah. So on last night's show, we talked about the somewhat underwhelming start to the box office for Morbius, starring Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to do this week, a part of me thought, well, I'm kind of curious, for all the chatter that Jared Leto seems to inspire online,
Hmm.
mostly of the negative kind. I was kind of curious, like, okay, so what exactly has this guy's career been? You know, as much as we keep hearing about his name, what are the movies that have kind of actually rose to prominence the most in his career? So that's why I put
Hmm.
together his top 10 box office list as of this weekend for Mr. Jared Leto.
Awesome. Well, let's take a peek at it here. Let's see whether or not Morbius even hits on the list. So we'll see, because this is that current, because Derek is that good. All right, here. So let's take in number one. We have the 2016 Suicide Squad coming at $325.10 million. Which this is one of those ones where Warner Brothers definitely played into weird, antic Jared Leto
Yep.
as the David Ayers version of the Joker. Um, but I would also certainly say when it comes to looking at this at $325 million, this is a group effort. I think this is a matter of comic book nerds and comic book people who like these kind of movies. We're looking for something different. We finally were getting that movie that was different, coming from somebody like David Ayer, even though it was a hot mess. Once we finally found out it was a hot mess, but also to the Will Smith factor, the Margot Robbie factor, the Jared Leto factor. There's a lot that's going on to this that I think that overall contributed to the $325 million. And not to take away from Jared Leto in the disrespect of the movie. People love, hate, they love to hate his version of the Joker. I have my own opinions, but um, I definitely think that it really isn't him that's really pulling these numbers in. I think it's more the Margot and the Will aspect of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, although we can't fully discredit, Jared Leto either, or should I say, audience's curiosity to see a new take on the Joker, because this was the
Mhm.
first time that we were getting a big screen Joker since Heath Ledger.
True.
So obviously there were expectations that were set. People were curious how it was going to play out, and ultimately they didn't like it. And we, save for the, you know, we ultimately would have never gotten another appearance by the Jared Leto Joker were it not for the pandemic and the Snyder Cut fanatics and HBO Max ultimately giving Zack Snyder money to make a new ending for his Justice League where he brought in Jared Leto to say some stuff. So,
Hmm. Which weirdly enough, even if that part of Zack Snyder's part of that didn't really seem like it was necessary, at the same time too, I kind of want to see where that version of the Joker goes. Because
sure.
that version of the Joker, even for that short period of time that he was on screen, was very intriguing. Because that Joker, even though played by Jared Leto,
Is
was
different.
is definitely not the same Joker that is in this movie here. So
Yep, totally.
that and that's where I think that, and for the sake of Jared Leto, I do think that some people, as much as they I think the Heath Ledger and some of the other aspects of who has been the Joker before, whatever, is why Jared Leto gets so much crap for this version of the Joker and whatnot. But even if that little bit of the Snyder version of his Joker does goes to show that I think he understands the assignment. He just needs to have the proper person to help guide him down the road.
That's fair. That's a fair assessment.
All right, coming in at number two, we have Panic Room, the Jodie Foster movie at $95.31 million. One of those movies where I find fascinating that it's at number 2 because so many times I forget that Jared Leto is even in this movie.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
he's one of the three thieves.
yeah,
So
he's not the first person I think of when I
no,
think
but
of
it, I mean, again, it was fairly early in his career, and you look at that trio because it's him, it's Dwight Yoakam, and it's
Mhm,
Forrest Whitaker. That's an eclectic trio right there, even back in 2002, um,
right.
going up against Jodie Foster and young Kristen Stewart. So,
There are those
and
days that I forget Kristen Stewart is in that movie too.
yep. And at this point in time, obviously Fincher wasn't, like a certified box office draw, but he is a name at this point.
Yep.
This is his follow up to Fight Club, which was, a fairly somewhat box office bomb of sorts, or didn't do that well. So having, kind of him just doing a straightforward thriller like this, with all the sleek Fincherisms that he can do and making a
Mhm.
pretty good payday as a result with this movie, which just turned 20 years old like last week. That did fine for itself. So,
It sit there makes me want to go back and because this is one of those movies where it's like I think I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I don't even remember if I've even completed watching this movie to the point where now that you bring up that it's in its anniversary, makes me want to like just want to pick up and be like, okay, did I miss it or what do we got going on here? Because I mean, every person that you have mentioned here, probably the obviously Jodie Foster is probably the one that's the most um known at the time that this movie comes out because even Whitaker's still kind of in that or I guess early stages that I remember anyway.
yeah,
Nobody
definitely
knows who
before he won an Oscar or anything like that. So,
right, exactly. Obviously nobody knows who Kristen Stewart is at this time and whatnot. And even if we're talking Fight Club and whatnot, people weren't going to go check out Fight Club for Jared Leto. People don't even realize half the time he's even in that movie. Um and and Dwight Yoakam is well just Dwight Yoakam. So uh I would say considering the relatively quote unquote unknown cast to this here, most of that draw is coming from Jodie Foster. I think this is a pretty solid return for Panic Room, I would think.
yeah.
All right, coming in at number 3, again, one of those supporting roles. Blade Runner 2049, $92.05 million. The Harrison Ford, Ryan Gosling follow up to Blade Runner. This is one of those ones where, again, though Jared Leto is not in this movie a whole lot, I really like Jared Leto in this movie, and I don't contribute any of the faults of this. Just that unfortunately this movie just underperformed in general. Like personally myself, I think it was a very good follow up, and I expected more out of this movie, and that has nothing to do with the cast or who made it.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I think this movie did pretty well for what it is because again, the first Blade Runner, no matter how you slice it, it's more of a cult movie than
Yeah,
anything else. That was never a box office hit back in the day too.
true.
Because what people may not recall is, so Blade Runner and The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing with Kurt Russell, opened on the same day, like a couple of weeks after E.T. came out. And everybody is seeing E.T. and nobody is going to either of these movies. But 40 years later, they've obviously maintained their reputations. And so,
Hmm.
obviously, getting to have this big budget sequel, with big stars, with Harrison Ford returning, which is a big deal from Denis Villeneuve, who's again, ascending up the ranks of directors in Hollywood. It's and of course, the stunning visual effects, the sound, the score. It's
Yep.
a great big screen experience if you saw it on the big screen during the brief period where it was there. But at the same time, you know, when you're a sequel to a cult movie like the original Blade Runner, there's only so far that you can go with that as well.
Especially
And
when
I
that
think that
bar is set so high.
yeah, and certainly Blade Runner 2049 was received, critically very, very well.
Hmm.
There's no doubt about that. But again, it's definitely not like an all audience, pleaser, especially since Blade Runner 2049 is almost 3 full hours long, which is also a bit of a deterrent to get like your casual viewer in there too. So
Suppose true.
so for all that it did, I think it did very well. And both as a piece of work in itself and as a box office performer too.
Do you ever picture Denny ever going back to Blade Runner 2049 and giving us multiple cuts like we have with the original Blade Runner?
He hasn't been the person to do extended cuts. I mean, at this point, he's made three movies, that are all over 2.5 hours long. So I think at this point he's able to get out the movie that he wants to right off the bat. So
That's good. Just because I mean, there's been those times where it's like you talk about the original Blade Runner, and one of the first questions that anybody has to ask is, which version of Blade Runner have you watched?
well, I mean that's more of a Ridley Scott thing because Ridley Scott loves to re-edit all his movies. There's multiple versions of Alien, of Gladiator, of you know American Gangster, all that stuff. So Villeneuve is not that kind of guy,
hmm
but which is fine, So it's okay to get it right on the first try sometimes.
You made me realize. I don't know if I'd ever realized that there was another cut of Gladiator, and now I'm curious.
Yeah, there is. It's on the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray has both, actually. So
Ooh. All
now you
right.
know.
So we come in at number 4, the 2021 House of Gucci coming at $53.81 million. The very over the top. If this is the part where like somebody says, Jared, you can go turn it to 11 like you did in the Suicide Squad, he definitely did that here. I love the people that like to joke about this movie because it's the house of how many different Italian accents kind of thing. That you know, again, love or hate Jared Leto. If there's anything that you can take away from this movie, there's two people you ultimately will remember, and that's Lady Gaga and
Yep.
that's Jared Leto. Everybody puts on great performances. I mean, Adam Driver does well, Jeremy Irons does well, like everybody, Al Pacino, they all do very, very well, but that's not who they're remembering.
Yeah. I think Gaga and Leto both know what kind of movie this ultimately should be. It
Hmm.
should be this grandiose, over-the-top, trashy soap opera type extravaganza, and that's where they're both playing it to.
Yep.
And that's why you remember both of them. And Leto, yes, Jared Leto is ridiculous in this movie. He's incredibly over the top, the most over the top person in the movie, and yet I actually kind of think he's the best part about the movie because he's going
I would
that
agree.
far and wacky.
I would definitely agree because there are those times with like say Gaga where she seems very, very over the top, but then there's other parts where she's very, very grounded. Whereas Leto this entire time during House of Gucci is always turned on to 11. You're wondering whether or not the dial's going to keep on going.
Yep.
All right. Coming in at number 5, this week's Morbius comes in at $39.1 million. Obviously, we've got to date because it's literally a brand new release. So, just by looking at this number here, I'm going to say, at least for the sake of its run, it's going to at least take over House of Gucci to have those two flip, but it's definitely not going to get to Blade Runner numbers.
No, and that's kind of where we're at.
Hmm.
Again, in this never-ending cycle of comic book movies. Obviously this one's going to fade very fast, and people are going to switch to, okay, when's Doctor Strange 2 coming out? I'm waiting for that, and of course Morbius is just going to fall by the wayside because of that, as well as all the
Hmm.
other reasons that we talked about on last night's show. With audiences not responding to it, with critics not responding to it, all those factors. It's not going to get very far. But there is the good point, as we were mentioning off mic before we started this recording, is this is kind of the first like big Hollywood movie that's where Jared Leto is like the one and only major star that
Yeah.
they're advertising. With everything we talked about thus far, Jared Leto is a part of the ensemble, for what it is, carving
Yep.
out his own distinct corner to stand out, but he's still one of many people in the cast. And here he is as the full blown lead. He is the Morbius in Morbius. And I'll kind of be curious, if he decides to do, more of these types of movies, where he wants to get out from under that, supporting actor type of umbrella and kind of anchor a movie a little bit more. I'll be curious, how much more he decides to dip into that,
Yep.
considering that Morbius hasn't turned out that well, but he shows that that he can anchor a production of this type as well. So
Mhm. And that's the kind of thing too, is that, where we've made mention is that he's willing to go that extra step. He's willing to go that extra mile for whatever he's doing. And as everybody has talked about the method and the madness that was Suicide Squad and stuff like that, is I think it's just going to be a matter of I absolutely think the talent and the drive is there. I think it's just going to be a matter of finding the right project,
yep,
finding the right writer that's going to be able to understand the mind that is Leto, and that director that's going to be able to point them, like I said, in the right direction. Like, again, I think he absolutely has that possibility. I think it's just a matter of he hasn't quite found the right pieces to his puzzle yet.
yep, pretty much.
All right. So coming in at number 6, we have one of my favorites, actually. One of my favorites. Urban Legend coming at $38.12 million in 98. I don't even remember if I saw this one in the theater. I do know that, and to this day, I still have this movie because this was one of those great, like, late 90s
Post Scream. Yep.
post Scream slasher attempts at trying to be like, can we be our version of a slasher and whatnot. And honestly, I enjoyed the hell out of the premise. The overall cast in this movie, especially for a lot of unknowns at the time in 98, uh I think is absolutely great. Robert Englund is fantastic in it. Again, Jared Leto is great because there's a lot of things about his character you always question about it. All of them. Just this is one of the ones, if somebody hasn't seen Urban Legend, honestly, I feel that they should, because especially if you're looking post Scream slasher flicks, whatever, this one is so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, just the basic premise of leveraging like urban legends into the mythology of a horror movie. I think that's fun and teasing of itself. Again, it's trying to find like how can we carve out a Scream like niche without coming off as a complete copy of Scream, even though again we're assembling a bunch of youngsters from WB and UPN shows and all that stuff, to anchor a cast like this, so that's fine. Yeah, I did not see this in the theater. Much like the Scream movies, Urban Legend was a frequently spun DVD in my household. Growing up, my brothers loved this movie as well. Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised they haven't even tried to revive this in some fashion, even though it's not doesn't have the name cachet of a Scream or even a I Know What You Did Last Summer or a Final Destination. But I think there's enough strength in it where if they wanted to
Oh,
do it, they very well could.
I would certainly agree. And I think that especially if they did it right with the cast that was in this, whether you're a cast member who lives or dies throughout the movie and whatnot, if there was a revival, I think there's enough of this cast from when it came out that you could bring them back just for some fun, for some like
Yes,
throwbacks with
different
playing
characters.
different characters and whatnot. Because one of the first things I think of is, just to use as an example and whatnot, this is pre-American Pie Tara Reid.
Yep.
So she hasn't even made a name for herself or whatever. This is before Joshua Jackson was making a name for himself for various different things. The first thing I think of is Fringe, when he was on TV and stuff like that.
Well,
Just,
I mean, this is during the Dawson's Creek era. We
oh,
can't
that's
forget that.
right. Yes, Dawson Creek. That's right.
Yep.
Sometimes when I think Dawson's Creek, I think is, Katie Holmes and James Vanderbeek
Yep. There.
and
Yep.
Michelle Williams. Um, all right. So yeah, I absolutely, I think this would be one of those ones where I think it would be a fun movie to revive. And you know what? Bring somebody back as, like, Jared Leto. Let him be the Brad Dourif at the beginning of the movie.
Hey.
Because if you're gonna make a movie like this, whatever, that's one thing I like about this movie. They were having fun with it because, I mean, the fact that you've got Brad Dourif of Chucky fame
Yep.
and Robert Englund of the Nightmare on
Freddy.
Elm Street fame, just to be like, hey, we're just having a little bit of fun here. So,
Exactly.
and after Urban Legend of the Bloody Mary direct to video sequel, it needs a revival because that was horrible.
I didn't even watch that.
Oh, I decided I'm just going to go through some franchises because this was not last year. This was 2020. I went through and I'm like, oh, there's a third one. Well, we need to watch that because And though Final Cut is not as good as the original Urban Legend, I was like, oh, there's a third one.
Yep.
No, no, nope. You're not missing anything there. All right, coming in at number 7, we have David Fincher's Fight Club, $37.3 million. The movie that if you remember that Jared Leto is in it, most people remember Jared Leto as the guy that Ed Norton beats the living crap out of. It makes the pretty faced angel not so
Yep.
pretty faced.
Yep.
Um, which again, he doesn't have a big role. He doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue and whatnot. Um, but I mean, I think for the sake of Fight Club and whatnot, I think he utilizes his time as well as he can in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's a brief impact, yes, but he is meant to have that pretty boy face that doesn't become so pretty. It's to make that turn as this movie gets darker and darker and darker and so forth. So, and obviously Fincher liked him because he brought him back for Panic Room. So it all worked out.
Oh, absolutely. And that's probably one of those things where it's like, all right, I like what you did here, so we're gonna give you a little bit more room to spread your wings and whatnot with Panic Room and whatnot. So I mean, clearly he obviously did something correct. But at the same time, too, I mean, again, yeah, he's not playing a big role. This is still early Jared Leto, but he's also in a room with some huge heavy hitters. Even if like Brad Pitt's making a name for himself, but he hasn't quite hit it just yet. He still had his late '90s stride and whatnot, but he's not like Brad Pitt of today. And going him, Ed Norton, to be in a room with Meatloaf. I mean, there's some strong people to be in a room with here. So I think, like I said, I think he did a good job with what he had.
Mm-hmm.
All right, coming in number 8, Thin Red Line, $36.4 million. This would be one of those ones where I don't think I even remember he was in it, but also two, this is one of those ones where I never got around to actually watching it. So you have
Well,
to fill
well,
me in on this one.
yeah. Well, that's funny that you mentioned because this is infamously a movie that because this was the big war movie made by Terrence Malick, and if you look at the cast list, there's a lot of people, a lot of big names in this cast, but a lot of the people in that cast does not have much screen time in this movie. To where it became a thing. Like they filmed a lot of footage, but most of it got cut out. It's like people like George Clooney, um, you know, Nick Nolte, Woody Harrelson, John Cusack. They don't have much to do. So, and again, this just came with it because for the purposes of Jared Leto, because he doesn't have that much in his roster, there were absolutely no restrictions on what I put into this list, not even counting any shortness of screen time, because that's part of the fascinating conversation with him at the box office is he's got some pretty small parts here, especially as we round out this list, but that's just how it played out.
Hmm. Oh yeah, and definitely because I mean he definitely seems to be in that supporting role. Obviously, Morbius is that first route into um, being the headliner, but just goes to show that he's there. Just sometimes we don't remember that he's there. But but I think you're right though. I mean, you have a movie like Thin Red Line where you have such a stacked cast, even to the point where even bigger names are getting stuff that are cut and whatnot, just because it's such a complicated and compact cast of people. You live with what you are dealt with at that point.
Yep.
All right, and then number 9, Alexander, coming in at $34.3 million. This is the Colin Farrell with blonde hair movie, isn't it?
That's correct. Oliver Stone directed. This also has Angelina Jolie in it, and Val Kilmer, and Anthony Hopkins, and Rosario Dawson in it.
So
Yeah,
again, a very stacked cast. Um, so I mean, does he even this would be one of those ones where I know of the movie, I never got around to actually watching it. Is he even got a big part in this here since we're kind of limited to what we're working with here?
yeah. I mean, I admit I have not watched any of the 87 different cuts of this movie,
That too.
but I have not. He is fourth billed because it's the billing is Farrell, Jolie, Kilmer, Leto, Dawson, and Hopkins. So that's a pretty big deal to have fourth billing on a big 3-hour historical epic like this.
Hmm. Hmm. Maybe one of these days I will get around to watching. But it's one of those ones where, yeah, like you said, there's multiple cuts. Depends on how much time you want to invest in this movie, kind of thing, in terms of how long it is.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, a number of these cuts are like nearly 4 hours long, which is
right, exactly. And
insane.
that's where, and I think that's one of the reasons, because I think even the theatrical cut, this is 2004. We're not in the, like, right now in 2022, we're basically getting used to the fact that, going to the theater for 2.5 hours is almost getting to the point where it's on the norm all of a sudden. Where
Yep.
in 2004, going to the theater for 2.5, 3 hours, whatever, was unheard
Rare.
of. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember when Lord of the Rings was hitting the theaters and whatnot, and you're sitting there going, "Really? I got to sit in the theater for 3 hours?" You
Yeah.
know, s-
I mean, it was funny because I was, watching SNL short from this weekend, where they talk about short ass movies.
I
Um,
love that. That is an amazing music video, by the way. People need to watch that.
yeah. And so that, pretend like, that reminds me, there are a lot of movies coming out this month that are over 2 hours long. Everything
Hmm.
Everywhere All at Once, nearly 2.5 hours. The Northman, nearly 2.5 hours. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is over 2 hours long, which is insane for a family movie to need to have to go that long. But
Yeah, that
and
movie 15 years ago would have been like
90.
100 minutes.
Yeah. And you add on to that the fact that you're going to have at least 20 minutes of trailers before the movie. The
Hmm.
trips to the theater get to be pretty darn big at this point. So,
Yeah. So that's that part where I find it entertaining that the movie industry is complaining about people not wanting to go to the theater, but then keep pumping out movies that are cannibalizing on themselves, because you can't have as many showings because the movies are so long. All these trailers, so you got that, like you said, on top of it too. It's like, well, no wonder people want to wait to watch these movies at home, but they don't want to sit in the theater for 2.5, 3 hours, 3.5 hours.
or the irony of, the Academy saying we got to get the Oscar show length down when the movies you're celebrating are as long or longer than the ceremony itself. But neither here nor there.
Exactly. Exactly. And then we round out our top 10 with the Angelina Jolie Girl Interrupted at $28.87 million. Again, one of those ones where Jared, I enjoyed Girl Interrupted. Excuse me. I have it, and it's one of those ones where I tend to forget he's even in this movie, just because he's obviously not the reason why you're going to go see this movie.
No, no, because yeah, he is Winona Ryder's ex-boyfriend in the movie. If I'm looking at the billing right now, he's like 13th billed on Wikipedia from what I can see. Again, very slight, but again, early in the career. And I think it's kind of telling that we're seeing a lot of these early smallish roles that tend to ascend over some of his smaller independent stuff where he was the star. And we'll get into that a little bit in terms of stuff that actually didn't make this list. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things that I was actually wanting to kind of get into. Well, for one, anybody who hasn't seen Girl Interrupted, it's a really good movie. It's a very interesting movie, especially during for the sake of the subject matter and whatnot. But is one of the things I wanted to throw out as we were going through this list here, is that Jared Leto is an Oscar nominated slash Oscar winner who's
yep.
won an Oscar for a movie that doesn't even break his top 10, and that's the Dallas Buyers Club, which again, anybody should have an opportunity, should watch that, because it's a very phenomenal movie. I think Leto does an amazing job in that movie and deserved the Oscar he got for it. But I mean, just goes to show is that depending on what roles he's picking, and the fact that he's willing to reach out for those roles that they may not be box office successes like these 10 movies are. And that's one thing I applaud Leto for, is he's willing to be like, you know what? I'm going to do that because that's something I want to do. That's the movie I want to make, whether it makes money or not, kind of thing. And he makes a movie like Dallas Buyers Club, gets acclaim for it, gets an Oscar for it and whatnot, but it's not even a movie that even broke his top 10 on a supporting role.
Well, here's the funny thing. Until Morbius came out, Dallas Buyers Club was number 10 on this list with 27
Oh,
million.
oh, that hurts my heart. Uh, But I
The
mean,
sorrow of being up to date. So
right, exactly. Darn you, Morbius. Um, are there any other ones that you were coming through as you were kind of putting your list together where you're like that you expected it to be higher, or anything that was kind of unusual that you kind of didn't see coming?
I mean, the things that we remember him for that aren't on this list are stuff that obviously wouldn't play well at the box office. Stuff like Requiem for a Dream, which only made 3.6 million, or American
Hmm.
Psycho, which only made 15 million. Movies that have made their claim on home video, and were kind of instrumental in Jared Leto transforming himself, from like these small supporting player in Hollywood projects to being, more of a prominence in these indie players. So there's that. Other ones that just missed the list included Lord of War, which was 24 million. That's the Nick Cage gun running movie.
I
Um,
enjoy that movie.
a movie that probably would have made this list had it not been for COVID is last year's The Little Things, which made 15 million bucks at the box office. But again, that
Hmm.
was one of the first HBO Max dual releases.
Yep.
And certainly, had COVID not happened, the 1, 2, 3 punch of Denzel and Rami Malek and Jared Leto probably would have made that enough of a box office hit where it probably would have entered this list, in my opinion.
I would definitely get behind that. I do applaud. I understand what Warner Brothers did with that respect, and chances are, I myself probably wouldn't have gone to go see that, even with that trio of people, to go see go to the actual theater to go see it and whatnot. And I was one of the ones that saw it on HBO Max. But I agree with you, because this is Malik just coming off his Bohemian Rhapsody win.
Yep.
It's Denzel being Denzel.
Yep.
Again, as we even look at this top 10 and whatnot, though he doesn't have a huge, star, Leto's star still glimmers enough that people know who he is, what he does, and is willing to talk about him, that they would be willing to go see what he's gonna do.
Yeah, I mean, and even remember when this movie came out, there's a lot of talk of like, where Leto, of course, kind of playing the creepy villainish type character. He's getting a lot of vibe for that. There was also something like, is he going to get an Oscar nomination for this movie of all things,
Mhm.
which didn't happen. But he got a nomination in some other circles. So, you know, again, we talked about it. He carves out this little creepy corner in his movies that garners some attention, and people can't resist it for that. So
Yeah.
that's why I'd be curious. Like, if he does try to make the leap into being like a full blown Hollywood lead, do audiences respond to that? I think we need more than just Morbius to give us the lowdown on that.
Yeah. Do you think, and I'm just throwing this out, especially for the sake of the little things and whatnot, is that if Warner Brothers would have held off on releasing that one closer to the end of the year when things are starting to open up, or like say for the sake of this here and whatnot, that it would have either done better, or if they would have not gone and done the, I mean, obviously without the dual release, we know that it would have done better and whatnot, but you know because I remember when this movie first came out, that was one of the first things that was talked about. Wasn't about Malik, wasn't about Denzel. It was about the possible Oscar nomination to Leto and whatnot. To think that if this would have been pushed down later on down the year, and everybody's talking about House of Gucci, House of Gucci, House of Gucci, if this would have been later on in the year, he might have actually had a little bit of pull in the Oscar for this movie.
Yeah, my fear is if you had released both Little Things and House of Gucci close together, they might have canceled themselves out, because then you kind of be splitting the vote, perhaps.
Hmm.
By separating those into two different Oscar seasons, he gets his attention for the Little Things last year, and then he gets his attention for House of Gucci this year. Of course, neither of them was enough, but certainly if you put them out back to back in the same season, they
But
definitely
what?
would have canceled each out there.
There's definitely that. There's definitely that. But I guess where my brain was thinking is that Little Things is a February release,
Yep.
and so. Oh, but that was but the dates had shifted for the Oscars and whatnot by
Yes.
this point.
Yeah. So
That's where I'm all thrown
yeah.
off. That's right.
Yeah, so the Little Things, because the eligibility period was the end of February, the Little Things was one of those movies that snuck into that period there. And I think maybe that was more so of like people thinking like, how are we going to fill these categories when we hardly have any movies to fill these categories with? So
Hmm.
there's that.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, that has been the top 10 for Jared Leto this week here. Be sure to check us out every Tuesday. We like to throw out different top 10 lists on box offices and for various different reasons. Do you have any clue, anything of what we are going to talk about here next week, Derek?
Yeah. So one of the big movies coming out this weekend is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And obviously, a lot of people are looking forward to it because it's the return of one Mr. Jim Carrey.
Hmm.
So I want to take some, just for my childhood pleasure's sake, I kind of want to delve into his career a little bit and see how things have played out because that'll just be a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness, I'm curious to see how this can go a lot of different ways, I think, just
Yep.
because he's he definitely has, and clearly and obviously in the top 10, the most of them are going to be comedies and whatnot, but he's got some other things out there that could definitely throw some interesting wrenches into some of those numbers and whatnot. I'm definitely curious, so I'm
Yeah.
definitely looking forward to that. So be sure to check that out here next Tuesday, and always every Monday we have our top five at the box office. Be sure to check those out. Excuse me. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterbox HQ. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Amazon, and YouTube. And support the show over at patreon.com/backlot605. Anything else that we want to throw out there, Derek?
Yeah, I think we should also promote. I forgot to mention this on the last show, but we actually have a live event coming up this Saturday as
Mm,
well. The 100th anniversary screening of Nosferatu this Saturday, April 9th at 6 p.m. at Average Joe's in T
that'll
with
be
a live
super fun.
score and some post film discussion. It'll be great. So stop on by.
That'll be super fun. So definitely check that out. All right. That has been our box office bonus for this week. We will check you out here next week.
See ya.